Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us for Left Bank Books welcomes author and career expert Lindsey Pollak, who will discuss her new book, Recalculating, Navigate Your Career Through the Changing World of Work. Pollak will be in conversation with CEO of The Memo, Minda Harts. Yay! Left Bank Books is St. Louis's oldest independent bookstore. Left Bank Books would like to thank all of our supporters, the supporters of Lindsey, Minda, and everyone for their outpouring of love for our bookstore. Left Bank Books offers curbside pickup and delivery to anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world. We are happy to be able to bring our event series virtual. We believe that events are a way to expand your mind and make the world a better place. We hope that you enjoy this event, and we hope that you support Left Bank Books by purchasing a signed copy for you or for all of your friends at left-bank.com. I will say we have signed copies of both of these fantastic books, and purchasing a signed copy of each of these books, or one of them, or both of them, and many other books allows us to keep our bookstore and staff operating. It allows us to keep this event series going. So thank you for your support. We need your support. I am Shane Mullen. I'm the events coordinator for Left Bank Books. I help produce our hundreds of author events each year with a fantastic team here in St. Louis. We will be taking questions from you, the audience, at the end of the event, so please type your questions as a comment. You can do that at any point in time through the conversation. Be sure to follow Left Bank Books on Facebook or YouTube to be notified about all of our fantastic virtual events. We have so many incredible events lined up for the year and are adding events daily. About tonight's book, Recalculating. Hold it up again. A leading workplace expert provides an inspirational, practical, and forward-looking career playbook for recent grads, career changers, and transitioning professionals looking to thrive in today's rapidly evolving workplace. COVID-19 has heightened career uncertainty in a work landscape dominated by turbulence and change. It is directly impacting how people are entering or re-entering the workplace. But as Lindsey Pollak makes clear, the pandemic merely accelerated career and hiring trends that have been building. Changes that were once slowly spreading have been rapidly implemented across all industries. This means that the old job hunting and career success rules no longer apply. Job seekers of all generations and skill sets must learn how to thrive in this new normal, which will include a hybrid of remote and in-person experiences. Increased reliance on virtual communication and automation, constant disruption, and renewed employer emphasis on workers' health and well-being. While this new world is complicated and constantly evolving, you won't have to navigate it alone. For 20 years, Pollak has been following the trends and successfully advising young professionals and organizations on workplace success. Now, she guides you through the changes currently happening and those to come. Combining insights from both experts and professionals across generations, she provides encouraging, strategic, and actionable advice on making lifelong decisions about education, building a resilient personal brand, using virtual communication to remotely interview, network, and work, skilling and reskilling for the future, and maintaining self-care and mental health. Like your personal GPS, Pollak equips you to handle workplace obstacles, helping you see them as challenges to navigate rather than impossible roadblocks. There is no perfect path to a dream career, but with Recalculating, you'll be prepared with the necessary skills and tools to succeed. And now, about tonight's speakers. Lindsey Pollak is the leading expert on succeeding in today's multi-generational workplace, and the New York Times bestselling author of Becoming the Boss, New Rules for the Next Generation of Leaders, Getting from College to Career, Your Essential Guide to Succeeding in the Real World, and The Remix, How to Lead and Succeed in the Multi-Generational Workplace. She was named in the 2020 Thinkers 50 Radar list of global management thinkers whose work is shaping the future of how organizations are managed and led. Her speaking audiences and consulting clients have included over 250 corporations, law firms, conferences, and universities, including a very long list: Aetna, Citi, Estee Lauder, GE, Google, JP Morgan, LinkedIn, Yale, Harvard, Wharton, and Stanford. She has been featured on The Today Show, CNN, and NPR, and in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. She's a graduate of Yale University. Tonight, Lindsey will be in conversation with Minda Harts. Minda is the CEO of The Memo, a career development platform that helps women of color prepare for their seat at the table by providing resources, curriculum, and access. The Memo is her first book. Minda is a well-connected, sought-after speaker and thought leader in the business world, frequently invited to speak on the topics of advancing women of color, leadership, diversity, and entrepreneurship. In 2016, Minda was nominated as a changemaker by the former First Lady Michelle Obama for her work advancing women of color in the workplace. She was also chosen by General Assembly to serve as one of their dream mentors alongside women like Cindy Gallup. Minda holds a BA in communication and an MA in management from Western Illinois University. She has also attended UCLA, Northwestern, and Harvard for continuing education certifications in global leadership. Minda is originally from Southern California, the oldest of 3 children, and is the first in her family to graduate from college. She currently resides in New York City with her French bulldog. In case you were not aware, you, the audience, are incredibly in for an incredible event. I'm just so excited. It is such a privilege to be able to have both Lindsey and Minda in the same place at the same time. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome them both. Hello. And if everyone at home, please give them a giant round of applause. Yay.
Thanks, Shane.
Thank you. So excited to have both of you here. This is really just such an honor.
Thank you for that incredible introduction. And Shane, you do such amazing work for authors. Both of us have benefited. Left Bank is such a phenomenal independent bookstore. Just thank you for your support and being amazing through this crazy time.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Lindsey, are you ready?
I'm ready. Minda, I'm the oldest of 3 also. And I just saw a tweet that said oldest children could basically run the world. So I feel very connected to you knowing you're the oldest of 3.
And I agree with that. I really do. We should be running just about everything. So excited to be here with you tonight, and so excited for our audience to chat with us and ask questions. So I have to show you this, Lindsey, that I have my book right here. And some of my favorite chapters was Move On, Move Up, Adjust Your Mindset, and Turn any job into a great job. Those really resonated with me. So I know that others will grab the book and enjoy it too. But I want to start with the question, why did you decide to write this book? Why now? And how has the pandemic accelerated trends that you've witnessed in the workplace?
I love that question. I didn't mean to write this book. I just published a book 2 years ago. And like everybody, in March and April of last year, I was blindsided by the pandemic and what it did to my career. I make my living as a professional speaker in addition to writing books. And I went from a fully booked calendar to a completely empty calendar in about a 2-week period. And my mission as an author and a speaker and coach is to write the advice I wish I had known. So I wrote Getting from College to Career about what I wish I had known. And my instinct when COVID happened and I was confused about how to move forward was to interview other people and say, what are you all doing? How are you getting through it? And that was kind of how the book was born. And it's funny, I don't know about you, but I always struggle with book titles. And this one, actually, the title came first because I was looking out the window and I saw cars and I just had this image of that moment when you're driving your car and maybe you hit traffic or there's an accident or you make a wrong turn and the GPS says recalculating. And I felt like we were all just kind of driving along, minding our own business, doing our thing. And when COVID hit, it was like every GPS on earth said, recalculating, you can't go that way anymore. And when I actually thought about it, I got optimistic, which is why the first chapter is about mindset, like you mentioned, because I always feel a little bit comforted when my GPS says recalculating, because it means there's another way, right? You might not be able to go the way you wanted, but there is another way. And when I started to go down that path, that was really how the book was born.
I love that so much. I think all of us, regardless of industry, we did have to recalculate, right? And so I really resonated with so much in the book, and being a public speaker as well, I really had to redefine what success meant for me. And I want to start the next question this way, so that for those who might not have read the book yet, what is a recalculator?
Sure. A recalculator is anybody who needs to pivot, change, adjust their skills, their learning, their mindset, their brand, their career because of COVID or for any reason. And, I don't think I don't want to use the term career changer because yes, some people decided to make a complete shift or they came to a crossroads and had to go left or right. But I think most of us have learned that in the 21st century, COVID or not, we have to be making little adjustments all the time, learning new skills, adapting to new technologies, kind of building our brands. So really, when I thought about the people I most admired, they were recalculators because they never stood still. And not to put pressure on people that you have to be changing yourself all the time, but we do have to be lifelong learners and always be thinking about the next step. We can't coast anymore. So hashtag we are all recalculating. I think after COVID, that's really become a reality.
Amen and amen. If you have had to recalculate, put it in the chat. Let us know. We want to know if you've experienced that or not. You are not alone, is what Lindsey is saying. And, staying in the same vein of being a recalculator, in your book, you offer 5 rules for recalculators. Can you share just a few of them? We just got to give them a sample so that people get the book and read it for themselves.
Yeah, I'll give you 3. The first one is embrace creativity, which is exactly what you mentioned. When I lost all of my speaking business, I couldn't keep pursuing speaking business. I had no choice but to be more creative. How can I do online events? How can I do coaching groups? How can I write more? And so it's about casting a wider net and realizing you have to be more innovative in your options. So if you're looking for a job, maybe it's looking at industries you hadn't looked at before. Maybe you had only been looking at big companies, so you start to look at small companies. So it's about adjusting and adapting and being more creative in the options that you're considering. So that's rule number 1. Rule number 2 is to prioritize action, which is the biggest mistake by far that people make in their careers and certainly in the job search process, is just thinking about it really, really hard and never actually doing anything. And I interviewed a lot of professional college career services directors on college campuses. And so many of them said they'll be coaching an alum, let's say, who comes back and says, I'm not getting any traction. I can't find a job. I'm so frustrated. And the career services person will say, well, how many jobs have you applied for? And the answer is like 1, 2. And they say, well, you've got to get out there. So action, action, action. I think a lot of people are struggling with, frustration, and the pandemic has been going on so long. Action gets you out of your head and onto your to-do list. So you've got to really get into that mindset, which I know isn't easy, but I think it's really essential. And the third tip that I'll share, the third rule, is to ask for help. You are not alone, and there are probably more resources than ever. Look at all the events Left Bank is holding. Look at all the webinars and podcasts and amazing information out there. I even was really interested how many people who had been laid off from big companies and had sort of formed communities with the other people who had gone through the same layoff, and they supported each other and they texted each other when they were down and they forwarded jobs to each other. Finding community when you're in a transition or in a recalculation, I think, is really critical. So those are 3 of the rules.
I love those, and there are more. So make sure that you read the book if you haven't already. You talked about asking for help when we need it, and I think, to your point, sometimes it's hard for us to admit that we might need help. Sometimes we've been conditioned to think that that's a sign of weakness, when it's actually the complete opposite, right? Once I learned to get out of my own way and ask for help, I was able to do so much more. So I wanted to ask you, Lindsey, how can we network effectively while we're all living in this virtual world? Because I hear from so many of my clients, how do I build social capital? How do I ask for help in this environment? How do you think networking might change in this post-COVID work?
In some ways, it's easier, right? Because people are mostly in place, not traveling as much. But it does take a little bit more guts, which I know can be really challenging, especially for people who are more introverted. So I think we have to take this whole drama away from networking, that it's writing this very formal email and asking someone really important for help. To me, networking is texting someone and saying, how are you doing? Like, how's your day going? What have you been up to? Networking is posting on Facebook, hey, I'm looking for a job. If anybody hears of anything in public relations, would you let me know? Networking is volunteering. And I think the other really important piece, which might make people more comfortable, is you can be the one who asks other people if they need help. And I found this amazing fact that at the beginning of COVID, I think it was in April of 2020, one of the top searches on Google was, how can I help? People want to help each other. And for 6 years, I served as a spokesperson for LinkedIn, and I went around teaching people how to use LinkedIn in the very early days. And Reid Hoffman, who's one of the founders of LinkedIn, he said he thinks people use LinkedIn wrong for networking. And he said he sees people go into LinkedIn and say, what can I get? What can I get from my network? And he said, that's the wrong approach. He recommends going in and saying, what can I do to help people in my network? What can I give to people in my network? I can like a post by a friend. I can forward a job listing to somebody who might enjoy it. I can post an article that might be helpful. And sometimes when you shift it from asking for help or feeling like you're a taker and you actually offer yourself, it builds your confidence because you know you have a lot to give. And I believe if you're known as somebody who gives and is generous in an authentic way, I think that comes back to you in spades. So I think it's really a mindset shift of treating networking as more casual, less formal, and also being more of a giver.
I totally agree with that. I think every one of us are networking probably every hour, and we don't even realize we're doing that. Right. And so thank you for sharing some of those tips. It also made me think about personal brand. Why is, because as we're networking, we're also, showcasing perhaps our skills or our interests. Why is it important for people to have a personal brand? And what does that really mean for job seekers and employed professionals?
So that's another word that people can get really uncomfortable with, right? Networking, branding, people go like, oh, it feels icky. If you don't like that word, all it means is, what is your reputation? What do people think of when they think of you? What's your headline? And this was a mistake I made when I came out of graduate school. I was like, all right, here are my skills. Here's my resume. Figure out what job I should have at your company. Make sense of it. And basically a recruiter who sees that will throw your resume in the garbage. You have to tell your story. You have to say what you want. You have to make sense of your career. So to me, a personal brand is not a canned elevator pitch, right, that you've memorized. It has to be authentic, but it is the headline of your LinkedIn profile. How do you describe yourself? And if you're in transition, say the thing that you want before the thing that you're leaving. So don't say former accountant seeking opportunity in business development, say business development professional, accounting background, right? So lead with what you want. On your resume, have a summary statement at the top that says, I've done diverse things. Here's what my top skills are. Here's what it is that I'm looking for. So it's really you taking all the threads of everything you've done and pulling it together into a headline. And part of that is to show people that you have done that self-assessment. The other reason, to be really frank, is that people are busy and people are kind of lazy and they don't want to read your whole resume and LinkedIn profile. They want to say, like, Minda, give me the 10-second pitch about who you are. So you have to get really clear on that. If you're not clear on it, then at least be clear on your skills. Is it leadership? Is it communication? Is it analysis? So if you don't know exactly what job you want, it might be the skills that you want to share with people, but the job is yours to explain that to other people.
Absolutely. Wow, that was so good. I hope you all were taking notes. Lindsey just on how to get your LinkedIn page right. And I also just want to say, to Left Bank Books, this event is free. So please support Left Bank Books at Left. You can see it on the screen, but make sure that we do that and support and purchase Lindsey's book. Lindsey, another thing that I wanted to talk to you about is well-being, because even though we're trying to do all the things, trying to update our LinkedIn profiles, living through a pandemic, our well-being and our mental health can sometimes suffer from that. So what trends are you seeing around employee well-being and mental health?
I'm really worried about this. I've had anxiety, mental health struggles in my own background. I'm very sensitive to it. I'm very worried about the statistics of younger generations really suffering. I think there are a lot of people feeling really isolated. So seek professional help if you need it. There are so many tremendous resources. So that's number one, top priority. I think companies are really bringing this to the forefront. And it was really interesting. Before the pandemic, you and I are both based in New York City, and Wall Street had Mental Health Week probably in 2019. And I remember you could have knocked me over with a feather. I was so shocked that Wall Street would admit or be open about mental health. So I think there is a lot less stigma today, which is really encouraging. And I've done a lot of interviews with companies during COVID, and I think that everybody realized this could not be a secret issue or a back of the employee handbook issue. This had to be front and center. So a lot of companies took what had been kind of like bottom of the list benefits, like an employee assistance program, access to apps like Headspace or Calm to do meditation and mindfulness, benefits for seeking counseling, career coaches on call. I think a lot of companies really added more of those services. I would also recommend, if you don't work for a company right now, your college career center is still available to you even 20, 30, 50 years after you've graduated, and they often can refer you to campus-based services as well. So if you need help, there are a lot of resources out there. One of my favorite things I saw during the pandemic that I keep thinking about was Canada put out a list of rules for working during COVID. And rule number 1 was, remember, you are not working from home or studying or job hunting from home. You are at home in the middle of a crisis trying to live and work. And I think that's really good to remember, that the difficulty level of everything has been raised 1,000,000%, and it's okay. I admitted I took a nap before this event. I just want to put it out there publicly because I was burned out and I've been doing too many events, and I took a nap. And sometimes you need to take a nap.
Absolutely. You got to listen to your body. And I'm actually jealous. I wish that I could have. Naps do solve a lot of issues. I want to stay there for a second, Lindsey. Do you think this emphasis on companies talking about well-being is here to stay, and also what companies do you think are doing a really great job with this?
I think there are some elements of COVID that unfortunately we're going to have really short memories about. I think as more people are getting vaccinated, I think a lot of companies are going to call people back to the office, and this whole idea, everything's going to change. I'm very skeptical of that. I am not skeptical of the commitment to mental health because, frankly, I don't think companies are going to have a choice. I think that if they don't address burnout, mental health concerns, childcare needs, they are going to lose top talent. And I think the companies that make it possible for people to take care of their mental health and address those concerns, I just think it's going to be kind of the lasting legacy of the pandemic for at least the next several years, particularly for younger employees. So there are a couple, I don't want to call out specific names, but just some examples. I think companies that have been very specific about when or when not they will be calling people back are doing a service, because I think the uncertainty is a killer for people to not know. Can I stay in my parents' house? Should I renew my lease? What am I going to do? And so the companies that have said, here is a date, September 1st, we promise you will not come back before that, or January 1st. So I think any level of certainty is really powerful. And some companies have done that really well. I've also seen a lot of companies, particularly with entry level, put a lot more emphasis on just simply checking in, which is not an email, but Minda, let's get on the phone. I want to have a one-on-one. I want to see how you're doing. And I know one investment bank that I work with, every senior executive had a list of a certain number of employees. And it was their job every week to personally touch base with every single person on that list, because you can't assume that the quiet person is fine. The quiet person could be suffering in silence and not speaking up. And so if you proactively reach out, I thought that was such a human way in this remote world to make sure that mental health is a priority. So those are two examples that come to mind.
I love that so much, because the reality is we all might be working from home, but working from home is different for everybody, right? You might have 10 roommates. You might not have a door that you can close. You might not have high-speed internet. And so I think it's and that might just be stressful enough, right? Or for those who can't turn their camera on because of whatever's going on in their home, and so I do really hope that companies won't have short-term memory, that they'll think about it holistically and realize that, two things can be true at the same time. We can be all working at the same place and experience it very differently. So thank you for those tips. I know that there's probably people who are watching us today who are actively job searching right now. What are your 3 tips for success?
3 tips for success. Number 1, I have to reiterate, is you've got to cast a wider net. And one of the things that I think is really helpful is to make a list of all the jobs you've applied for or all the things that you've been thinking about and get really creative. So if you were looking at jobs 10 miles away, look at jobs now 20 miles away. If you were looking at jobs in nonprofit, look at government, look at for-profit, look at other areas. So it's really kind of taking that whole universe and expanding it. The second thing is to really get good at your research to expand your opportunities. So if you have a couple companies that you're interested in, follow them on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever social media you're interested in. Learn about them, study them, see what other companies they talk about. And just to give a personal example, I came out of graduate school in the late 1990s and I wanted to work at a website. It was the .com boom in New York. And I had a master's degree in women's studies, so I wanted to overlap those. And there were two websites at the time. Some of the Gen X people in the audience might remember, women.com and iVillage were the two hot websites for women. And I applied to both and heard nothing. And every time I saw a job, I applied and heard nothing. But I kept following them in the news. And one day there was an article in Business Week magazine, in the actual hard copy magazine, and it was about women's websites. And it talked about women.com and iVillage. And I read the article, and the last sentence of the article said, another competitor has just been funded. The founders of Working Woman magazine are launching a website. And you know what I did? I went and I called Information, which was a thing in the early days of the internet. And I asked for the phone number of Working Woman magazine. I called and I asked if they were taking applications. And that's where I started my career. So if you follow people in the news and in the media and in social media, which makes it so much easier, you might open up opportunities to other people. And I would say the third piece of job hunting is to get really specific in the job boards and places that you're looking. So a lot of people go to Indeed.com or LinkedIn or ZipRecruiter, and those are great. But to me, that's like going to Target or Walmart, right? If you want to specialize, if sales jobs, jobs for people over 50, jobs for women of color, jobs for small business, jobs for people who want to work outdoors, there are all these niche websites where you'll be in a much smaller pond of people who want to hire someone looking for what you want to look for. So the more niche you can go in your job hunting, the better. And I'm going to add a fourth, which is you're always going to do better finding a job through human beings than any kind of job site. So when you're casting a wider net, when you're doing your research, when you're looking at job boards, simultaneously tell everybody what you're looking for and say, do you know anybody at those companies? Because even if it is the most junior person at that organization, a human being recommending you to a recruiter, to a hiring manager is always going to be your best door. So go through the job listing door, but also go through the back door of trying to find somebody in the company as well. It's not easy. You might have to apply for a lot more jobs now than you would have in the past, but people are getting jobs right now. And I'm really starting to see a little bit more movement in the job market. So now is a really good time to be out there.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think that, sometimes we think about, COVID and the pandemic, but actually so many companies now are saying, hey, we're fully remote. So now there's so many more opportunities that people can apply for that job without having to move to New York City, right? So I do think that. And I laughed, Lindsey, when you said iVillage. I do remember iVillage.
You do? Oh, good.
I remember it very vaguely, but I also am a minor in women's studies. So we're finding that we have so much more in common than I thought.
Well, then I have to tell you my favorite story. And I wonder if you ever had a similar experience. This was not at Working Woman, but the first job interview I went on after graduate school, the recruiter looked at my resume and said, a master's in women's studies, that'll get you nowhere. And I was like, in that moment, I was like, here I stand. I will go somewhere in my life with my master's degree in women's studies. I will defy you. But yeah, that was my first experience with that degree. But I'm so glad that we share that.
Yeah, I hope you sent him all your successful books. I hope you sent him your New York Times book.
There you go.
Yes, well, because I knew about the bias in the job search, I didn't even put women's studies on my resume. I'm like,
oh wow.
Because I thought, oh, they're gonna think I'm a feminist, and so that's a whole nother conversation. But I thought about those things alone with being, a Black woman entering into, some of these predominantly white spaces. So, that's a whole nother conversation. But I appreciate you sharing that. The other question that I wanted to ask you, and I hope that all of you are starting to think about your questions for Lindsey, so make sure you start to pop those in the chat. For people who are in a job and want to ask for a raise or get promoted, what is your advice?
So you have got to do your homework on what works in your environment. You've got to kind of study the strategy. This is where that sort of corporate politics and observation, and this is a little bit harder to do in a remote environment. So number one, find out the protocol, right? Do people ask all the time? You can even ask HR, is there a particular time of year? Does it have to be during your annual review? Know how the company is doing, right? If budgets have just been slashed, you might not be in the best position to do it. You also want to do your research about what is kind of industry standard in your region. And I don't mean going to salary.com or pay scale. Those are fine, but you've got to really talk to human beings. So professional associations, this is why mentors and peers, I think people who are maybe one job step ahead of you are really powerful to ask for this kind of advice. And to any women in the audience, I would ask men, and men, be allies to women and tell them this is the salary range that people are getting. Some companies have strict rules against salary, but I think it should be more transparent. So you've got to really not guess and feel like you have a dartboard of numbers, but start to do your homework and research. What are people making? What is your value? And then really, really importantly, you've got to start to craft your argument or your request in terms of what you are doing to add value to the company. It's a really big mistake to say, give me more money because I deserve it, or I need it, or I want it. You've got to say, here's the value I've added. Here's the business I've brought in. Here is the money that I've saved us. Here is the additional work that I've done that has value. So you've got to really understand for your company or for your boss, what do they value? What is really important? And I think you can even ask, right? What is it that is most important right now? What can I achieve that would be most meaningful? And then if you go in knowing that maybe you're going to have to ask more than once, if you say, I'd like to request a raise, here's the value, here's what I'd like to ask for. If they say no, then you can always say, what would it take to get to that? What value would I need to show? But I think that getting in the habit of asking is really, really important. I've interviewed so many women in particular over the years who said that their biggest regrets in their career are not asking sooner for raises and promotions because they felt like they had to be absolutely sure they were going to get it. Whereas traditionally, and it's a little bit of a stereotype, a lot of men will just ask and ask and ask and ask until they figure out how to get it. So the asking is part of the process, right? It doesn't have to be this kind of big event. So I talked a lot about that. I'd love your thoughts as well, but this is a skill that you can build.
I agree. I think the many of the points you hit home for me, but one in particular was talking to other people about the salary range. Most recently, a colleague of mine who were in the public speaking space, on gender equity, she spoke at a company maybe 2 months before I did. And they had offered me a certain rate. And I felt like that was kind of low. And so I actually went back to her and I said, I know this might be odd and I hate to ask you this or be, imposing, but, I'm about to speak at the company you just spoke at. And I feel like they might be offering me a less, lesser of an amount. And she said, here's what they gave me. And they were paying her 3 times more than they were offering to pay me.
Can I jump in on that? Oh, finish your story, but I have a very similar story.
I'm so glad that she told me because then I had the information I needed to make a decision. And I went back to them, Lindsey, and I said, I have some new information about the speaking rates. And I recently spoke to someone that also spoke here and you offered them this. And I said, I can't come in good faith talking about advancing women of color in the workplace. And you're not even going to pay me what you paid, a white woman to come and speak about something else. I said,
and what happened?
And so, they said, I said, so we could either talk about this and I hope we can find an agreeable amount, or I'm not going to be able to do this because if you do this to me, then you're going to do that to the next Black woman that you ask. Mm-hmm. And so they wrote back and we had a nice conversation and they miraculously were able to come up with the amount that they should have offered me in the first place. And we had a great time. But I was scared. I was scared to do it. But I knew that that's part of advocating for myself. That's part of the process. I would love to hear your story.
Oh, I'm so glad you shared that. I think that a lot of what we're talking about is you've got to be willing to have uncomfortable conversations. Like, it is awkward to ask for help in a job search. It is super uncomfortable to ask another speaker what they make. I have come around, and I'll tell you the experience that made me do it. I will share my rates, not publicly at Left Bank Books, but I will share my speaking rates with anyone, particularly women. And I've had very candid conversations. Tara J. Frank, I don't know if you know her, but she has publicly shared hers on Instagram. I think we need to do, she's wonderful. We have to do more of that. And I've seen a lot of men post it. I actually belong to a women's network, a listserv for women entrepreneurs. And we have a rule that if you post a job or refer a job, you have to put the salary, because we don't want anything to be secret. So I'll tell you when I changed my mind about speaking fees. I was at an advertising agency and I did an event. There were 3 speakers. The other 2 were men. And I saw them speak and I did my gig. And a woman, she was very quiet, very shy, PhD. And she came up and she had been on the committee for the conference. And she very quietly said, "Can I share some information with you? I hope you're not offended." And, when anyone says that, you're like, "Oh, what's coming next?" And she said, "I just want you to know you were the best of the 3 speakers and the cheapest." And I thought, you know what I don't want on my tombstone? She was the best and the cheapest. And she said, same with you. She said, they charge double what you did and you need to raise your rates. And my gratitude for her, she didn't have to do that. And it was probably uncomfortable and weird, but she did. And so I've tried to pass that on with salaries, with speaking fees, with book advances, because otherwise you get stuck in those positions. So I love that you did that. And I love that they stepped up.
Yes. And I love that you did that, or that you do that, because when people ask me, I'm very clear with them, because that's how we're a good ally, right? We tell each other these things so that someone else can have the information they need to make a decision, so lean into that courage, people. You can do it.
You can do it.
You can do it. The last question I have before we jump into audience questions is I want to circle back to LinkedIn and social media do's and don'ts, because we spend so much time on these platforms. Can you share any do's and don'ts for LinkedIn and social media in general?
Yeah, it's funny. I served as LinkedIn spokesperson from 2009 to 2015, and not that much has changed. The fundamentals are still the same. Your headline on LinkedIn, the words right under your name, are the single most important piece of real estate about you on the internet. In terms of keyword searches, in terms of search engine optimization, in terms of just normal human beings who check you out, you have got to stuff that with everything you want people to know about you. And if you go and check mine out, I have lots of lines and slash marks and words and all that. What do you want people to know? That has got to go directly in the headline. And the first sentence of your summary has to be the most important. I know people say, well, I'm going to build up to the big finish. I'm like, no one's going to see it. So put the best stuff at the top. Your photo should look like what you would wear to a job interview in your industry or on your most important day of work. So if you want to be a video game designer, you can be in a hoodie. If you want to be an accountant, you should probably be in a suit. So you want to look as if you are in the position you want to be in. And when it comes to the networking piece, I think you can reach out to almost anybody, but you've got to customize that request to reach out. Hey, Minda, I saw you speak at Left Bank Books, or I read your book, or you and I went to the same college. I accept people because their name is Lindsey. I'm like, oh, you're Lindsey. I'm a Lindsey. Great. Just give me something that says I took more effort than just clicking connect now. And most people will connect. And nobody ever in the history of LinkedIn has ever been offended that you reached out to network, because that is why LinkedIn exists. I don't like the people who send spam emails. I think that's different. But if you are authentic and genuine in your outreach, and I think the final thing about social media, whether it's LinkedIn or any site, is I think people are often too formal in their first outreach. They write this really long, almost cover letter. I'd like to send you my resume. I'm looking for a job. To me, that's like going up to someone at a party and saying, will you be my best friend? Let's go on vacation together. Instead, you say, hi, it's nice to meet you. I've followed your work. I'd love to connect for 15 minutes. Or could I send you a question? So I think using social media to just kind of tap someone and start the conversation, as opposed to trying to do a formal introduction, that's the best use of any social media. I think you can do it on Instagram. I think you can do it on Twitter. I think you can do it on anywhere. But just try to make that opening to have a conversation. And that's where you can bring up the broader issues. So there's a lot you can talk about with social media, but I think use your same instincts that you would use in a personal, maybe conference or party situation, and try to apply that online.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Lindsey. I know I dislike when someone sends me a message and they try to tell their whole story in that first blur. It's like, just ease in, let's ease in, like you said.
Hold on.
But
slow your roll.
This was awesome. I hope you all have already ordered Lindsey's book from Left Bank Books. And I will hand it back over to Shane.
Well, don't go anywhere because, Minda, some of these questions are very much for you because Lashana is in the audience. So, all right. But Nathalie was taking notes and providing really great comments and quotes from the event. So I was also taking notes. So yes, this was an incredible conversation that I have a lot of questions and I'm certain the audience does as well. So if you have more questions like I do, type them up in the comments. But let's start with a question from Elise. So Elise is asking, do you have any specific advice for over 50 job seekers in the current climate?
Yeah, I'll start with that one. Ageism is real. Ageism happens, but you can't control it. And you can't know what organizations or individuals are going to be ageist. So I think you have to control what you can. So I think for somebody over 50, number one, there are so many organizations and websites that specifically cater to job seekers in that market. Start where you know people are committed to over 50 workers. So AARP, Next Avenue, there are a lot of over 50 job boards. So I would say that is a really good strategy. Number two, you don't have to put your graduation year. You don't have to put the first 3 jobs that you had. People are going to ask if they want to know. I don't think it is any sort of red flag to emphasize your skills and your credentials over those specific years. So I think it's a really good rule of thumb not to do that. The third thing I will say is if you network and people meet you first and see how fantastic you are, they're going to be a lot less likely to think about your age. So if they see a resume with 50 years of experience, they'll probably know. But if they meet you in person and you're energetic and you're enthusiastic and you're knowledgeable and you impress them, the age is not going to be as important. So I would double down on the networking. I would double down on your skills. Obviously, you want to stay current with the technologies if that's any sort of challenge. But I want to tell you, and I never want to blame the victim or blame the person who's being discriminated against ever. But many, many, many recruiters who I interviewed about this topic said that often when someone over 50 goes to a job interview, the first thing out of their mouth is, you probably think I'm too old for this job, or you're young enough to be my daughter. So don't ever get in your own way before giving the other person a chance to not be thinking about your age. Minda, I'd love your thoughts on that as well.
Thanks, Lindsey. Great advice. And I think that's true. You know, even I used to go into the workplace and say, oh, you probably think I'm too young, you know, for when I was younger. Of course, I'm older now, but, you know, I don't have to point that out for people. So I think that's a great advice. But one thing I would say is right now, because all of us are recalculating, so we all have to do some things a little bit differently. One thing that I love that some companies are doing, they have apprenticeships for the people over 40 or those who once we're retired and want to re-enter the workplace. And so seek out some of those companies because those are the companies where you're going to thrive at. Those are the companies that are looking for you. And so I just want you to, you know, put it in the Google search, apprenticeships for over 50, and you can see some of the programs that are out there. And you can also see what are some of the skill sets. And also this is where you can lean onto your network, right? To ask them about opportunities. And as we're talking about age discrimination and any type of bias, we need to be conscious of ageism. I teach a course at NYU on talent development, and one of the themes that we cover is ageism, because yes, these students might be 25, but at some point they're going to be, you know, 57. And so I really tell them, listen, think about these things now and solve for these problems now so that they're not an issue later. And so I do think as leaders, we have to hold ourselves accountable to make sure diversity means for all people.
Agreed. Just one more resource. I remembered there's a website called iRelaunch, lowercase I Relaunch, which is particularly good for women over 50.
Is it irelaunch.com?
I'm not sure if it's .com or .org. Let's find out. irelaunch.com.
All right, putting that in the comments.
Thank you.
Lindsey, since you brought up Next Avenue, and that's a company or website that I have actually done interviews with and have worked with.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, they're great. A former journalist who used to be in St. Louis works for them now. But I've done interviews with them about reading groups, and that made me think, this is a group of people who are readers. And what better networking for people like over 50 than professional women's reading groups where they are working women that like to read, that like to be social, that you could very easily network with. And you could read Recalculating and have plenty of things to talk about.
And buy it at Left Bank Books. I love that. I love that idea. Anything that you like to do that is authentic to you is networking. If you play on a softball team, if you go to a reading group, if you're in a cooking class, it's just networking is just making friends and meeting people. And I think what we have to normalize is just like I would say, hey, Shane, I love your shirt. Where did you buy it? I have to be able to say, hey, Minda, I'm looking for a job. Do you know anybody? Here's what I'm looking for. I think the more we are comfortable with those kinds of conversations, the more anything, and I think a reading group is a great example, is going to be an opportunity. Now, I wouldn't do it just to network if you don't actually like books.
Yeah.
I think that if you're authentic, people are going to understand you and like you in that way, and that's going to be a natural connection.
So Lashana has a question. Well, yes. So you spoke a little bit about what is on your resume. And is there anything you consider definite do's or don'ts on a resume? I've heard some women, Black women specifically, have taken off degrees, jobs to avoid intimidation from the recruiter.
So, Minda, I'm going to toss this to you, but I'll just say a couple of thoughts. I want to go back to you taking off women's studies, which I think is really interesting. You also talk about the name issue, which can be a concern for people with ethnic names. I want to talk about remixer rule number 4, which is know your non-negotiables. I get asked this question a lot, and I'll just give an example, which is, let's say you worked for the Democratic Committee of Missouri. Should you put that on because maybe a Republican will read your resume? And my answer is always, it is totally your decision. Is it for you? No big deal. You don't really care about it. Maybe it would bother somebody, so you're going to take it off. Or is being a Democrat so fundamental to who you are that you wouldn't want to work for somebody who didn't like that about you anyway? And that is your choice to make. So I would never tell anybody how to make that decision, but I will tell you that it is up to you to decide what is just who you are. Like, I'm a mother. If I go in and talk about my daughter and that's not okay, then that is not a company that I can work for anyway. So I know that about myself. If it is something else that's not so important, like a hobby of mine, then maybe I can negotiate. Minda, I'd love your thoughts on some of the deeper issues here. I think it's so important.
Yeah, I agree, Lindsey. I think, hey, Lashana. But what I will say is that's how I've grown or evolved in my thinking. Before I was acutely aware of discrimination, racial discrimination. So, back then you'd have the resume, you'd send it in, people would see, my real name is Yasminda. So I started using Minda because I didn't want to scare anybody off. I didn't think I'd get a call back because back then, now I'm aging myself, they would call you on the phone, right? So if they couldn't feel like they could pronounce your name, then they might not call me, So I went with Minda because I felt like that was a safe thing, right? And I also thought, oh, women's studies, it's probably going to be like maybe some man or some woman who doesn't, subscribe to women's studies philosophies that would think things about me before having a chance to meet me. And now what I would say is exactly what you said, Lindsey. I now put everything on a resume. I put everything out there because if this isn't the space for me, I need to know that, right? If you don't want me there because I'm using Yasminda, you don't want me there because of women's studies, or if you look on LinkedIn and you see I'm talking about Black women in the workplace, then this is not the space for me. And I would rather take my talents somewhere that once includes me, right? And not is judging me before I even get a chance to get in. So as Lindsey said, know your non-negotiables and you center those, because then you'll be able to plant yourself in places you can grow and feel seen.
Well said.
Excellent advice. Lashana says, thank you, Lindsey. And hey, Minda. Nathalie says, and forgive me if I'm saying, I have a friend whose name is Nathalie with an H in there. So Nathalie says, yes, my favorite part is know your non-negotiables. So, and Elise says, no one should be criticized for studying women's studies or gender studies. That is so sad.
Thank you.
And I agree. Like, as someone who has been a hiring manager, I'm like, obviously I would never look at that and go, ooh, like, no, like that's Like, yeah, I don't understand why why that would be terrible. Yeah. I will never understand the world, and I'm so glad that the two of you do, because thank you. One thing that I wrote down that I think a lot of my friends are dealing with, and a lot of people that are thinking about job change and thinking about specifically now, because um, distanced education is a thing that can happen. So a lot of people are considering, is it time for me to go back to school to further my career or to change career? So I was wondering if you had advice for people that are thinking about that, and how, when should they know to make that decision?
It's such an important question. I remember in the global financial crisis, 2008, 2009, how many people said, I think I'm going to ride out the recession in grad school. And 2 years later, they had $100,000 in debt. So you have got to not think of it as writing something out, but you have to think about the cost. And there are a lot lower costs. But to me, grad school, and this may not be a popular feeling, but to me, grad school should be a last choice. You should be so positive that you want to go to grad school that you've ruled out everything else. Now, there are a couple industries. If you want to be a doctor, you have to go to medical school. If you want to be a lawyer, you have to go to law school. So here are my rules. If it is required for the job that you are positive you want, do it. If you can do the math that what you will earn when you come out in your first 5 years will cover the costs that you have incurred, I'm okay if you do it. If you can't answer those two things, I want you to dip a toe in something else before you go and commit to a huge tuition, even a small tuition. So to give you an example, Minda and I have both worked with General Assembly, and I interviewed them for Recalculating. And it's not a full degree, but you will get a degree and help from General Assembly in coding and other topics. And they said when they do intake, they always say, so Shane, you're interested in General Assembly and becoming a coder. Have you ever watched a YouTube video about coding? Have you ever tried it? Have you ever done 5 minutes of this before committing to thousands and thousands of dollars of joining our course? So to me, you have to go and make sure this is absolutely positively what you want. And really interestingly, there's an economic study, like a really deep econ study that I found in the book, and they actually called it Changing Lanes, which is often to change from one career to another. It's not as much of a change as you might think. There's often a lot of crossover between one career and another. So you might not need an entirely new degree. You might need a 1-credit course, or you might need a LinkedIn learning class. And just to give an example, there was a chef who I interviewed for the book who was not working because of COVID shutdowns. He was actually kind of tired of being a chef. And he went and he did an assessment test. And I wanted to share, I do have an offer for everybody of a free assessment test on my website, lindseypollak.com/SP. If you take an assessment test, it will often show you other areas where your skills would naturally apply. And the chef did that. And it turned out he was like this close away from real expertise in logistics because he had ordered all the ingredients. He had planned the staffing of everybody who worked in his restaurant. And he took a 1-credit course on logistics and was able to get a great job in a very high paying field that he really enjoyed and had the skills for. So don't assume that it's kind of like when your GPS says recalculating, it doesn't say go back to your driveway and start the entire trip over. It says, all right, take what you have and we can just add a little bit along the way. So really long answer to say, there's a lot I want you to think about before you do grad school. And I will say I got a scholarship to grad school, which is why I went and did a women's studies degree. So that is why I made the choice. If you can get it paid for, terrific. But if you're going to make the investment, I think there's a lot of steps along the way. Minda, what do you think?
I agree with you. And I just recently, as Shane mentioned, I had a lot of continuing education outside of grad school where I went back and did like weekend intensive courses. Just recently, I finished a online course at UCLA for screenwriting. Now I don't need to go to film school right now. I dipped my toe in the water and did my screenwriting class, and then I'll build on that. But I think it's okay to do that. And I hope that you'll all take Lindsey's assessment, because I think sometimes we find that we have this adjacent experience that we didn't even know. So don't be afraid to test out, and definitely hit up YouTube and some of those free things first to see if you even like it. I think that's a great strategy.
I wanted to ask, and before we, Minda, will you tell us about your new book? Because I want people to go out and pre-order the book. And they can pre-order the book at the same time that they order Recalculating from Left Bank Books. They can do it at the same time, and we will be more than happy to provide people with that book in October, which is when the book comes out. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, thank you so much for asking, Shane. And my next book is called Right Within: How to Heal from Racial Trauma in the Workplace. And as you all know, there's been so much racial unrest over the past year, but not just then, many of us have been dealing with microaggressions, macroaggressions, things of the sort for many, many years. And we haven't always had the space to be able to talk about what that looks like and how to be right within. So even if we don't have the allyship, even if we don't have the good manager, how can we still have tools and resources to move forward and not constantly be in a racialized state inside the workplace? And so this book is for women of color who've experienced these things, but it's also for managers and for our colleagues to make sure that we're not creating and perpetuating toxic workplace behaviors.
Yeah.
Can I give a shout out? I read the memo as a white woman, and it's essential reading for white women to read Minda's work and similar work to understand the perspective and how to be allies. I just think it's so critically important, and I got so much value. So I can't wait. And are you going to write the screenplay for this too? Like, is there a movie as well?
That is my hope. So maybe I need a couple more classes under my belt, though, Lindsey. But thank you.
I love it. Will you write the screenplay for Recalculating? I love it. You heard it here first.
We're doing it.
All right. Well, oh, wait. I thought that we were out of time. We're almost out of time, but what was so something that you talked about earlier, and I guess we can throw this in really quickly, but other cultures, I just found this out, other cultures, Spanish, really put a value in taking vacations and not overworking and being good to yourself. And our culture has not done that very well. And I'm wondering, how do we, like me personally, how do you change that in yourself, and how do you change that in your company?
Company is a much harder question. It absolutely positively has to be modeled by senior leadership. I don't care what your policies are. Nobody will take a break if the senior leaders are not taking a break. So if you really want your company to change, I think it has to start at the top. From a personal perspective, and I'm always looking for tips on this too, because I have not traditionally been good at it. I'm a really big fan of having an accountability partner. I wanted to be more mindful. My friend Alana did too. And we text each other every day after we do our meditation. And if we don't, we bother each other and we yell at each other and we get on each other's case. So whenever I want to do something, even if it's taking a break, I will say, hey, Minda, text me at 5 o'clock and make sure that I have logged off and I'm relaxing. So I think sometimes getting your friends to peer pressure you and have that accountability can be really powerful. Minda, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I wholeheartedly agree. I have people who will just send me a message, like a friend of mine, Annette, she'll be like, have you rested today? Are you doing too much? Are you taking a day off on Saturday? And I need those checks because I'm a workhorse. It's like in my DNA. And so I need help. I thought
my first child, oldest of 3. I'm telling you, it's our burden.
We need to be free from it. Yeah.
I'm the same, like such a workaholic, and I love that advice because I think that is really great, having someone be like, are you done
Minda,
for the
I think
day?
we should text Shane tomorrow, Minda, at what time? 8 o'clock, and say, Shane, are you in your chair reading a book with a blanket and a mug of coffee, mug of hot cocoa?
Yeah.
What time tomorrow can we hold you accountable?
So we have an event tomorrow and I should be done at 8 o'clock. So yeah.
Done. Minda, are we in? Okay.
We're in.
Oh. Well, I'm such a big fan of both of you. This is the second time I've gotten to do an event with each of you, and it's such a pleasure. I want to shout out Lori Rudeman for like kind of making, like, we're going to go full circle. We're going to like keep doing events in line. So like Minda, you're next. So hopefully we'll do an event for you in October. Yeah, like this started with Lori, and Lindsey was the conversation partner for that event. Now, Lindsey, we're doing an event for you. Minda, you were the conversation partner. Actually, I guess this kind of started back with you, Minda, since you were the first. Like, it's all moving in a big circle.
It's all there. Well, thank you for the support, and shout out to everybody in the chat who's been very active, Nathalie, Elise, and others, Lashana. So thank you.
And to the audience watching, buy the book, learn a lot, tell me all about it, and let's hold each other all accountable, and let's become better people. So
thank you so much for having me. Thank you to all the ladies in the chat who are also the oldest. Lashana, Elise, we've got a lot of oldest of three in the crowd. We have to support each other. Thank you, Left Bank Books. Shane, you're such an advocate. Minda, you're such a friend and supporter. This has just been so special. So thank you, everyone, for taking time.
Thank you.
Have a good night.